Painting may seem like a lot of work, but just follow these simple steps and the next time you paint might not seem so daunting. In this video, I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know to achieve the perfect paint job. Before you're ready to paint, make sure you have all the right materials. The first question to ask is, do you need primer? The answer to that most of the time is probably not. Primer is only really needed when you're painting over bare drywall, stained or repaired areas, high gloss finishes, or like drastic color changes. So unless you're going from midnight black to pearly white, skip the primer. You'll also need painter's tape. There are a million different kinds, but I stick to the basics. Honestly, they're all the same. A 3.5-inch angled latex brush. It's about $12 to $15, but it's well worth it and will do a much better job than any cheap brush, which tends to be streaky and make weird textures. It will also hold more paint than a cheap brush, and it makes it easier to cut straight lines, which is super important when you're painting a wall. A roller with a nap cover. Depending on the texture you want, there are different types of nap covers. Use 3/8 inch for smooth surfaces, a 1/2 inch for semi-smooth surfaces, 3/4 of an inch for rough surfaces, and a 1 1/4 inch for very rough textured surfaces. A 1/2 inch is the most commonly used nap cover and pretty standard for a basic wall, so that's what we're going to go with today. A 2 to 4 foot extendable roller pole. Trust me, this will make your life so much easier. You will also need a step ladder, a drop cloth, a cutting bucket. You should never work directly out of a paint can. You're more likely to spill it, and if something falls in, like dust or dirt, you've pretty much ruined the whole thing. It's also just easier to carry around. You'll need a paint tray and some disposable paint tray fillers. The fillers aren't necessary, but they definitely help with easy cleanup because when you're done, you can just throw them away. Spackle, primer, sandpaper, and a putty knife. I know I just said you probably don't need primer, but we're gonna get to that in a second. Now that you've purchased your paint and supplies, it's time to prep the space. Sometimes this part takes longer than actually painting the room, which can be annoying, but trust me, it is worth it. First, wear an outfit that you really don't care about. It's going to get messy. Then take everything out. Furniture, wall art, carpets, take it all. No matter how careful you are, paint tends to splatter and get on nearby things, and that sucks, so don't do that. You'll want to remove any outlet covers and switch plates and cover them up with some painter's tape. Then lay down a drop cloth. Then spackle up any holes in your wall, from nails or screws or scuffs, whatever. Something that I like to do is scoop a tiny bit of spackle into a plastic bag and then poke a hole in it. This makes kind of a handy little dispenser, and it makes it much easier to get the spackle out. All you have to do is squeeze it, plop a little dab on your finger, and push it into the hole on the wall. Generally, that will be like the perfect amount that you need, and then you can just glide on over it with a putty knife. Easy peasy. Once the spackle is dry, sand it down. I recommend using one of these little sanding sponges. They're pretty neat. Seal the spot with primer to ensure the finished coat goes on nice and smooth. Primer is necessary to make sure the paint will adhere to the surface instead of soaking into the wall. Now for the fun part. It's time to paint! Pop open your paint can with a flathead screwdriver and let's get started. Since today I'm just painting the walls, let's cover up the baseboards with painter's tape. You want to work from the outside in, starting with the ceiling cut, then the corners, then the baseboards, and then fill in the walls with a roller last. Pour some paint into your cutting bucket and dip your paintbrush about 1/3 of the way in, generally 2 fingers width. Tap it on the sides to get any excess paint off, and do not scrape it. The best way to hold the brush is kind of like a pencil, like this. That allows you to have nice, swift movements and hopefully keep a steady hand. Paint with smooth strokes and feather out the edges to prevent runs. It's good to brush about 4 inches down from the ceiling before going in to cut, because you don't want it to go on too thick. You want to cut a hair into the ceiling, because if you leave a tiny line unpainted, it's going to be very visible from down below, but if you go slightly over it, it's very hard to notice. Fun fact. And you also don't need to obsess over making it perfectly, unbelievably straight, because up close you'll definitely notice, but as soon as you step down, those tiny imperfections are going to be very, very hard to see. There definitely are parts of this process that do require close attention to detail, but this is just not one of them. Continue cutting all around the rest of the edges. Only do one wall at a time, or even half a wall if it's a biggie, because it needs to be slightly wet when you apply the roller so that they seamlessly fit together. Generally, the texture of a paintbrush is going to be different from the texture of a roller, so you want them to kind of gradient into each other, and that's not really going to happen if one of them is dry. For the corners, use more paint than you think. Corners tend to be thirsty. Once the edges are painted, it's time to break out the roller. Dip just a little bit into the paint and roll it across the pan to even it out. Resist the urge to submerge the entire roller. So the general rule is that you lay it on and then you lay it off. What this means is paint the entire wall and just get it all on there. You don't really need to be super precise because once it's completely covered, you're going to go over it one more time to spread it all out evenly, which is called laying it off. You don't need to dip the roller in paint again to lay it off, just use whatever paint is left over on the roller. So here, I'm laying it off. The paint is still wet, there's some paint residue on my roller, but it isn't entirely soaked, and I'm just going up and down in straight lines side by side, slightly overlapping each time. And don't worry about these lines, as the paint dries, they will disappear. Try to go slow to avoid paint splatters. Take your time to get the best results. This is the sound that you want to hear. Not too saturated and not too bare. Reload the paint frequently instead of pressing harder to get more paint out of it. This can cause drips and give it a weird texture, which we don't want. After reloading, start painting again about half a roller's width away, then spread it out in either direction. This will make sure you aren't overlapping too much paint at a time. Turn the roller sideways to get tough spots like under the windows or a half wall like this one. Most of the time you will need 2 coats, but it really depends on the paint. Once you're totally done, let it dry and make sure you remove the tape within 1 or 2 hours to prevent it from adhering to the wall. If you need to take a break in the middle of your painting sesh, don't freak out and feel the need to clean everything. Just cover your bucket, hammer shut your paint cans, and don't waste time cleaning your roller because it honestly takes forever. Instead, just cover it up in plastic wrap or shove it in a tight plastic bag, and it will be perfectly fine in there for several days. To clean your brushes, run the brush under warm water and thoroughly scrub it out. Use a slop sink if you have one, because it's going to get messy. You can use dish soap to help get the paint out, and you can get a cleaning brush tool to really clean the paint from the bristles. But make sure you reshape the brush before you let it dry, otherwise it's going to dry all weird and wonky. To clean the roller, just run it under water and squeeze out any excess paint. This may take up to like 10 to 20 minutes, but you really want to get all the paint out of there. You could also get a 5-in-1 tool from the hardware store, which is just this weird hook thing, and it will scrape all the paint off. Honestly, a lot of people just throw away their rollers instead of dealing with the extra work, but it is possible. I swear to you. Once they're clean, store them upright to dry. Once your walls are completely clean, put the room back together again. Get some new decorations, maybe a throw pillow that matches your new wall, and enjoy your new space.